Will you stop looking at me like that? I give you plenty of attention. I pet you so much. I snuggle with you while I'm editing these videos and while I'm planning them. You can have a little bit of a break so I can record. But I say no. No, Mommy. I say no. Yeah, I know. I love you too. Okay. Well, there is a dog in this movie as opposed to the last one that had a cat. Or I guess that's an improvement. Pet me. Okay, fine. Okay, so today we are going to talk about Howl's Moving Castle. There you go. Which is one of my favorite Miyazaki movies. I mean, I love the love story that's in it, and it's just a great story about finding confidence in yourself, not just from the point of Sophie, but also from like the point of Howl and everything like that, and learning about what matters to you and everything like that. So I love this movie. So this is the 14th animated fantasy film directed by Miyazaki, and it is produced by Toshio Suzuki and everything. And it came out in 2004. Why did you push my chair? Because I could. It came out in 2004, November of 2004. And it is based off of the novel by the same name that is that was, when translated into Japanese, it basically translates to The Wizard Howl and the Devil of Fire is how it translates. But it's Howl's Moving Castle, and it was written by the British writer Diana Wynne Jones. And it basically tells this, it's basically kind of the same story that what happens in the movie. I know that there's a little bit of like slight adaptation shifts that are made from the book to the movie and everything, which happens with any adaptation and such. The first half of the film is pretty faithful to the original novel, but the second half changes completely. Changed completely during the development, adding in the themes of war and different things like that and everything. When the original, Diane Wynne Jones, the author of the actual book, had made the deal with Studio Ghibli for them to adapt this, she had made the request that Miyazaki not change Howl's character. And she was kind of worried in the beginning, but then later on she gave a very positive impression of the film and saying that it retained the same spirit of her original work. I do believe, though, that she didn't want to have them adapt anymore because this is part of a series, because there's like Howl's Moving Castle and then there's like Howl's Flying Castle and like some other stuff like that. So a little bit of a difference there in regards to, she didn't want them to adapt the rest of it. And Miyazaki doesn't do sequels very often. As I said, with The Cat Returns, that's kind of the closest thing to like a sequel movie that they've done, is The Cat Returns from Spirited Away. So, into the actual story. I'm trying to figure out what she's going to do in the background. Are you going to lay down? Are you going to do something else? She just ate, and we went on a walk, so she should be fine. And she'll get snuggles while I'm editing this, so she'll be just fine. Although her dog hair will be much more visible on this cream colored shirt than it would be on any of my black shirts. But going into the actual story, so basically the story starts where we are introduced to the moving castle itself, and it emerges from the fog, and we get the idea of the scale of the thing, everything and such. It's moving around the countryside, not too far away from this town. And in the town, we are introduced to Sophie Hatter, who is, she works at this hat shop that had belonged to her father before he passed. And she basically is one of the people that makes a lot of the hats, like designs them and everything like that. And she can design these beautiful and flamboyant hats and everything like that, or very elegant hats and such like that. But she herself views herself as very plain. As she says later, I've never thought of myself as beautiful once in my life. And so we're kind of introduced to that. We see that she works alongside other women that work in the hat shop as people that sew it, or the models, or stuff like that, or the sales girls and stuff like that. And then we also hear the girls shout, oh, look, I can see Howl's castle. And like they're looking out the windows of the shop, and they can see like Howl's castle moving in the distance. And the girls tease each other because it's just like, oh, I wish he would fall in love with me. And they're just like, no, you shouldn't want that. Howl rips the hearts out of, girls that he thinks are beautiful. He steals their hearts and everything like that. It's like, but he only takes them from beautiful girls. So it's, it's setting up this whole, kind of supposed to be setting up Howl as like this monster type of a thing. And, so they all head off on their own. And then Sophie ends up going out. And we have this cute scene where it's like she can design all these beautiful hats, but then she just has this very simple hat that is like the hat that she wears throughout the course of the movie. And she's like looking at, she like looks at herself in the mirror and tries to look cute. And then she just like is like, nope. She's heading off through the town, so we get to see a good look at this town. It's a very European style town. We also see lots of soldiers there. They seem to be putting on a type of military parade. And there's lots of flyovers by the different, plane flying machine type things, because it's Miyazaki, and there has to be some sort of flying sequence or flying machine or something like that in almost every movie he does, one way or another. It's like Porco Rosso, yeah, they're gonna fly. Spirited Away, flying dragon. In this, it's like flying machines. And Howl flies too, so there's lots of flying sequences, and of course Miyazaki loves designing those. But so Sophie is making her way through the town, and we see the military parade going on and everything. And as she's going through some of the back alleys trying to get to the bakery where her sister works, she ends up running into some of these, a couple of these soldiers that keep trying to flirt with her. And she's not used to being flirted with at all. And B, they're being very forceful about it, and she clearly does not like it. And they're just like, oh, she looks so cute when she's, scared. And she's like, I have to go. My sister is waiting for me, trying to get them to leave her alone. And they just refuse to leave. And she ends up then, from behind her, ends up showing up this very handsome man with a, slightly shaggy blonde hair and this, nice cloak and everything like that. And he's like, oh, there you are, darling. I've been looking all over for you. And the guy basically just makes a few quick gestures with his hands and sends the two soldiers marching off to wherever he sends them. I don't know, but he just sends them marching off. And then he's like, meeting Sophie, and it's basically supposed to be that clearly he's a wizard. He just made these two very strong soldiers just kind of walk off with just a few flicks of his wrist and his fingers, and they're headed off. So he's like, so, where are you headed? And she's like, the bakery, it's just up ahead. And he starts, walking her down the street, and he's like, just act normal. I'm actually being followed. And they're walking. And then they end up getting chased by these weird blob things, blobber shadow things that appear out of the walls and the ground and everything like that. And they're chasing after Sophie and the wizard. And eventually they end up to the point where Sophie and the wizard, spoiler alert, this is Howl. That's not surprising by anybody. That's not surprising to anybody. This is Howl. And that's not revealed until slightly later in the movie, but, you can put two and two together. It's a movie about a Howl's Moving Castle. Howl has been mentioned several times, and now a wizard has shown up. It's Howl. And they end up getting to the point where, they had to, jump into the air, so they're, kind of, walking through the air and everything. And he's being very kind to her and everything like that, and he helps her. He's giving her compliments, and she's a little, she's not used to that type of compliment and everything. And they end up, he gets her to the bakery and drops her off, and he's like, I'll lure them away. You wait a while before you leave again. And, it's the whole, it's the cute guy saved me, and then I got to go for like a walk on air and everything. So she's just like a little bit like, okay. And then we are introduced to Sophie's sister, Letty. Now, I do not remember if Letty is supposed to be the older sister or the younger sister. I don't remember if that's ever stated. I'm sure it's stated somewhere. And for some reason, I think in the books, I think they have another sister, but I'm not sure. But what we end up seeing is, of course, down in the bakery, we see Letty, who is like this very popular girl. She's very beautiful, very much like the blonde-haired beauty that all of the guys are just like fawning over and everything like that, and flirting with and all of that stuff. But she's not mean about it. She's not one of the ones that lets that go to her head. Letty is still a very nice person. And she gets word that Sophie just arrived on the roof, and she runs upstairs, and like you can clearly see that these two sisters very much care for each other and very much get along, and they have a very good relationship for how they have this set up. It's not like, oh, Sophie is jealous of Letty, that Letty is so beautiful, and Letty rubs it in Sophie's face, or doesn't care about her sister, that type of stuff, which in a lot of stories, that is kind of how it ends up going, unfortunately, if you're doing fairy tale based stuff where it's just like, oh, with Cinderella and her jealous stepsisters and everything like that. But that's not exactly what happens here. And what ends up happening is we see Sophie and Letty talking, and Letty is just like, wow, he must have been a wizard then. And Sophie's like, but he was so kind to me. He rescued me, Letty. And Letty's like, of course he did. He was trying to steal your heart. You were so lucky, Sophie. If that wizard were Howl, he would have eaten it. And Sophie goes, no, he wouldn't. Howl only does that to beautiful girls. And when we see this in the movie, and Letty is just like, you really need to be more careful and everything like that. And the thing is that I don't think Letty thinks that Sophie is ugly by any means. It's just that Sophie has this very self-deprecating setup where she just, she's seen, we'll see their mother later on in the movie, and the mother is very beautiful, and Letty obviously takes after their mother. But Sophie probably took more after their father and everything like that, and just she doesn't view herself as beautiful. She views herself as plain and ordinary and everything like that, which is something a lot of girls deal with. A lot of guys deal with it too. Based around what's considered, beautiful by, modern standards, or whatever the standards of the time are, and everything like that. So Letty and Sophie talk and everything like that. And Letty is very popular. Like everybody that works at the bakery knows Letty, and thinks she's very nice and sweet, and like we see her saying hi to everybody that's coming through the bakery. I think it is just literally she is just a very nice person, and she just likes to get to know everyone that's around her. Other people would take it in a different way because it's always men. But I just think she's just very nice to everybody that's around her, and if you want to think I'm naive for that, then go ahead. Eventually Sophie ends up making her way home. Well, Letty first tries to convince Sophie that she really doesn't need to spend the rest of her life in the hat shop, that was her father's dream, and that Sophie needs to go and try to find her own dream and live her own life. And Sophie's like, no, the hat shop was very important to Father, and I want to keep it going and everything. And so Letty's like, okay. And so Letty very much wants Sophie to have her own life and follow her own dreams and everything like that. And so then Sophie starts heading on her way home, and she gets back to the hat shop, locks the door, goes over to the desk, turns the lights on, door opens, and she's like, oh, I thought I locked that. And earlier on in the movie, we were introduced to where we see all of the little blobber men go back into this carriage type thing, this very carriage that's being carried by two things that are very similar to the blob men, and that's carrying them around. And I think it's Howl or Letty, I think both of them, or at least one of them, mentioned that the Witch of the Waste is on the prowl again, and out looking for victims or whatever the case may be. And so we get back to the shop, and this very, large, elderly, elegant woman comes in. Not elderly, but elegant looking woman comes in. And she just tells Sophie that her hat shop is very tacky, and like just insults the entire place and calls Sophie tacky and calls the hat shop tacky and all of that stuff. And Sophie does not like this, and she's just like, and she like stands up to the woman and like, well, we're closed anyway, so here's the door. You don't have to buy anything. Please leave, type of a thing. And the witch goes, that's plucky, standing up to the witch of the waste. And before Sophie can react, the witch, hi, what you doing? The witch, casts a curse on Sophie and kind of just like, I don't know, it looks like she kind of like turns into a ghost type of a thing and like goes through Sophie and puts the curse on Sophie and then leaves. And she's just like, the best part of that curse is that you can't tell anyone about it before closing the door and leaving Sophie behind. Eventually, we look back at Sophie, and when Sophie, she's like all hunched over now and much smaller, and she, looks down and she picks up her hat and she looks at her hands, and they're all, wrinkly and old, and her body is very stiff and everything like that, and very, joints, aches and pains and everything like that. And she's just like, oh, that's not good. And she goes over to the mirror and she's like looking in the mirror and like messing with her face to like feel all the wrinkles and everything like that that's on her face. She's just like, oh, that's not good. Oh, try not to panic. Try not to panic. This isn't real, like type of a thing. I'm just like, yeah, I'd be kind of doing the same thing too if I instantly got like, oh, I insulted a witch. Now I'm old. That's not good. She's just like, oh, that is definitely not good. And she like makes her way back into, the part of the shop / house where she sleeps, and makes her way there. And she's like, everything will be okay in the morning and everything like that. And she makes the comment of like, well, at least her, my clothes match my age now and everything like that. So she leaves, type of thing. Or like she makes that comment soon. And, she makes her way upstairs and goes to bed. The next morning, the shop's been open for a little while, and Sophie's mother shows up. I don't think the mother ever gets a name. She's just Sophie's mother. Shows up at the shop, and apparently she travels a lot. I don't know if she's supposed to be like a spokesperson for the hat shop or what. I don't know. But she shows up, and she looks very much like Letty with the blonde hair and everything like that, beauty. And she has like the very flamboyant hats and much more colorful clothing and everything like that. Like, Letty clearly took after their mother in regards to that stuff, in regards to, how she looks and everything. And the mom is just like, talking to everybody in the shop, and she's like, oh, blah, 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 this hat's the latest rage in Kingsbury, which is their capital city. And, she's like, well, where's Sophie? And they're just like, oh, Sophie hasn't come down today. And she's like, oh, well, I'll go check on her. And she heads upstairs or to the sleeping quarters area where Sophie is. And she's just like, knocks on Sophie's door. And Sophie is just like, don't come in. I have a horrible cold. I don't want to get you sick. And she just sounds like, and the mom goes, you sound like some 90-year-old woman. It's like, you're not wrong. You are not wrong. And Sophie's like, it's okay, I'll be fine. I don't want to get you sick. And the mom is just like, okay, and like leaves. I'm like, wouldn't you want to check on your child regardless of not wanting to get sick yourself? But like, so the mom leaves, and Sophie ends up deciding that she needs to go and try to find either something that can break the spell, or at the very least, do something that can make it better, fix the curse, whatever. So she heads out, packs some food, and she starts making her way out of town, and ends up, riding on like a hay bale rack cart out of town. And then heading further and further into the waste, which is this is like where Howl's castle lives. It's like within the waste, and where it roams around. It's this area that's outside of the towns and cities and stuff like that. The countryside area. And that's where Sophie is, roaming around out there trying to see if she can find anybody that can help her. And, she's like, I'm going to go and see what I can find. And, even the guy that's taking her out there, and she's like, you better be careful out there, Granny. There's nothing but witches and wizards out there. So she starts heading off, and, at one point she stops to eat her food, and she's like, well, at least my teeth seem to be in good condition. I'm like, well, that's a very important thing when you get older. You want good teeth. And she ends up seeing this stick sticking out of a bush, so she decides that she's going to try to, get it so she can turn it into a cane. And she starts, pulling on the stick and trying to break it off, and out of the bush pops this kind of scarecrow-looking thing that has a turnip for a head, which she then nicknames Turnip Head, even though he looks like he's made out of her least favorite vegetable. And I'm like, well, I don't like turnips either, so there's a lot of things that I would consider my least favorite vegetable. But she calls him Turnip Head. And he, is a scarecrow that, bounces around a lot and, kind of follows her a little bit, and he's on this giant, this very tall stick. And so, she's just like, okay, well, fine, I'm glad I could help you get out of the bush and everything. And so she starts walking off. And Turnip Head shows back up again, and he ends up having this cane that he found for her, and he drops it, drops it in front of her, so she has this nice cane that she can use that has a little bird head on it. And so that makes things at least somewhat more easy for her to get around, but it's starting to get dark and very windy, and it looks like a storm is coming. So Sophie is trying to figure out what to do, and eventually, she tells, Turnip Head, and she's like, well, maybe you can find me someplace to stay for the night. Turnip Head basically leads back the castle to where Sophie is. Leads Howl's moving castle to where Sophie is, and kind of helps her get onto it and everything like that, to where the door is, so she's able to get inside, and she starts looking around, and she it's filthy in there. She can't quite tell that 100%, but it's just filthy all over the place inside of the castle. And she ends up making her way over to the fireplace so she can warm up, and out of the fireplace ends up being this, there's this talking ball of fire that is the fire, and he's like, I have a very powerful and dangerous fire demon named Calcifer. I love Billy Crystal in this role. I'll be going over the voice cast later, but I love Billy Crystal in this role. So, they end up talking, and he's just like, you got a bad curse on you, too. And she's like, And he's just like, how about this? I'll promise to help you if you help me. And he's like, I don't know, lady. Demons don't make promises. And she's just like, fine, go find someone else then. And he's like, come on, you should feel sorry for me. This spell keeps me stuck in this castle, and Hal treats me like I'm his slave. It burns me up. You gotta keep the water hot, the rooms warm, keep the castle moving. If you can figure out how to break this thing I'm in with Howl, then you can break my spell. After that, I can easily break the spell that's on you. And she's like, okay, fine, it's a deal. And she just falls asleep in the chair in front of the fire. So they're just arguing type of a thing, and they make a deal in that regard. And the next morning when Sophie wakes up, well, not necessarily she wakes up, but she's woken up by this little boy named Merkel, who is supposed to be Howl's apprentice, and he comes rushing in, and he's like, who's this? He sees the old woman there, and he makes his way to the door, and because there's knocking on the door, and there's this little dial up by the door that flips around based on where the knocking is coming from. And there's 4 different dials. One is black, that leads to not a good place. One is green, that leads to the waste. I think in this case one's blue and one is yellow. I think of what they have for those 2 setups. One leads to one town and one leads to the other town. And so Sophie and Markle are, Markle is going to the door and answering it several times. We see one that leads to Kingsbury, which is, just this, is the capital city, and there's another one that leads to one of the other towns. And when we see from the other side of the door, the town, the Howl's Moving Castle, the door portal is basically connected to these different shop fronts. One is for a wizard Jenkins, and one is for a wizard Pendragon. Now, Pendragon is obviously a reference to Arthur Pendragon from the Arthurian legends. Jenkins, I'm not sure. I don't know if Jenkins is a reference to another famous wizard or witch, but it's not one that I'm familiar with off the top of my head, because I'm like, there's no Jenkins in Harry Potter, and even if there was, this book was written before Harry Potter was published, so there's no reference there. But like, so Markle has to keep like pulling on his disguise, which is, this cape and then like a long beard and everything like that. And like, he has to take like, he gets mail that's for Howl, and he has to deliver this potion to this little girl that's showing up and everything. And like, Sophie wakes up while all of this is going on and kind of is like watching it and like interacting with Markle and kind of getting yelled at by him, because she like tells the little girl, oh yes, I'm the most dangerous, I'm a very powerful witch and everything like that. And she's just like looking at and like amazed by this, and she like goes to the door, like keeps trying it, opening it up to, out from the waste and then into the capital and then into the other town and everything like that. And she's like very much like, okay, this is kind of cool, which I would admit that is very cool, to be able to like look around and everything like that in that regard, and like go from one place to the other very easily with just like the same door, with just like flipping the the dial and everything like that, and go to these 3 different places. She doesn't try to go to the black one, because I don't think she's allowed to try to access the black dial. That's just for Master Howl, as Markle calls him. And Markle explains that I'm Master Howl's apprentice, so I have to practice magic, and Master Howl is not here right now and everything like that. And eventually what ends up happening is, of course, there ends up being this, that Markle and Sophie end up trying to have breakfast, and Markle is just like grabbing cheese and bread and things that don't need to be cooked, and Sophie finds just bacon sitting around out in the open, which does not seem sanitary to me in the slightest. I'm just like, okay, I'm assuming there's some type of food preservation spell on a bunch of this stuff to keep it from going bad, because okay, the bread can be left out for a little while and not necessarily go bad right away. The cheese, a little bit there. And there's eggs sitting out as well that, like, in normal circumstances, if not kept, at an appropriate temperature, will go bad very quickly. Trust me. So it's just like, that's, those, I'm assuming there's some type of food preservation spell on them to keep them from going bad. And Sophie's like, well, how about we have some bacon and eggs? And Markle's like, well, no one can cook except for Master Howl. And she's like, oh, no, I can cook. And he's just like, Calcifer doesn't listen to anybody that's not Master Howl and everything like that. So eventually what ends up happening is, Sophie ends up going, gets the nice big pan, and she goes over to the fire, and she has like the basket of eggs and the bacon and everything like that, and she's going to try cooking. And she goes over to the fire, and she's like looking at Calcifer, and she's just like, okay, Cal, come on, time to cook. And Calcifer is just like, no, I'm not going to do that. And she's like, fine, do you want me to tell Howl about our little deal? And she kind of like puts the frying pan on top of it and like gets the pan over Calcifer until he gets to a good simmer and everything like that. And then she starts getting the bacon going, one slice at a time. And bacon looks so good. Again, it's the whole Ghibli thing of just like, make the food look delicious in the movie. Yes, you're very good at that, and that doesn't help my stomach and wanting to eat it. But they do that. So Sophie is trying to cook, and then out of the door comes Howl, out of the black place, or out of the black dial on the door, and he comes in. And he's just like, and of course it's revealed that this is the same, this is Howl. This was the wizard that was, by her at the beginning of the movie, that's helped her at the beginning of the movie and everything like that. And what ends up happening is, of course, he's like bemused by what's going on. And he's like, so who are you? Talking to Sophie. And she's like, I'm Grandma Sophie. I'm your new cleaning lady. Calcifer just hired me, and I start today because he's disgusted by how filthy everything is in here. I'm like, yep, Yep. And so he's like, and he's looking at Calcifer, and he's just like, you're being so obedient, Calcifer. And he's just like, she's not by choice, she's making me do this, type of thing. So Howl just kind of finds that funny. So what ends up happening is Howl kind of takes over the cooking and get 2 more pieces of bacon and like 6 eggs all going in the frying pan at the same time, and they get tea warming up and everything like that, so they can have tea with their breakfast, and Markle sets the table and everything like that. And they're doing all of that stuff, and like Markle was very surprised that like Calcifer's listening to her, type of thing, like Calcifer's doing what she says, type of a thing. And like, while this is going on, Sophie was the one cooking. Calcifer was like, here's another curse, may all your bacon burn. Which is, I know it's a big thing on like shirts and mugs and everything like that with like Calcifer on it. It's like, may all your bacon burn. I love that line. And so it's just, yeah, and that, that's when, Howl shows up and starts, taking over and everything like that. So eventually what ends up happening is, while Howl is cooking, he keeps feeding Calcifer like the eggshells, and Calcifer just keeps like gobbling them up and everything. And then when all the food's ready, they go all to sit down. And Calcifer's like, you guys get to eat while I do all the work. So he's just annoyed. And they all sit down and they start eating and divvying up the food. And like, they only have like 3 utensils that aren't, I guess, filthy. And so they're all eating. And Markle just like gobbles up the bacon and the eggs and everything like that. And it just looks delicious. And the toast and all of that stuff. And what ends up happening is Howl ends up asking Sophie about something in her pocket, and she's like, huh? And she pulls out this paper and she hands it to him, and it, bursts into flames and like sears a mark on the table. And Markle's like, well, what does that mean? And he's like, it's from the Witch of the Waste. You who swallowed the heart of a falling star, blah, 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 are cursed, and your heart will be mine, or whatever it is like that. And he's like, that can't be good for the table, and just like uses its power to like wipe the mark off the table, or at least make it hidden. And Markle's like, and Howl doesn't like this, so he tells Calcifer to move the castle like 40 miles to the west, and then gives Calcifer the rest of his food. And then Howl goes upstairs to bathe and get changed, and all of this other stuff is what he's doing. So he heads upstairs to do all of that. And Markle then asks Sophie, so do you work for the Witch of the Waste? And she just goes, no, I would never work for that, blah, 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 blah. She did that. Like, she can't actually say the words, which is part of the curse. She can't actually say what the, Witch of the Waste did to her. And she's like, finish your breakfast, we're cleaning as soon as this is done, and everything like that. So then after breakfast, Sophie just is starting to just like clean everything. It's just like going through and just like cleaning the ceiling and the walls and the floors, and just like shoving a whole bunch of stuff out of the door to get it all cleaned and all taken care of and bagged up and everything like that. And like Markle's running out and like pulling out different things from the shop and putting them out front, and one guy comes in and he's like, can I get my potion? And Markle's like, as this like old man disguise, is just like, come back later, there's a witch on a rampage in there. So she's just like cleaning, and then she like starts sweeping out the fireplace of all of the cinders and ashes and everything like that, and like kind of pulls Calcifer out of the fireplace. And as she's doing all of that, and Calcifer almost goes out, which is not good. And he's like, you better understand that if I go out, then Howl dies too, and everything like that. And he ends up almost falling and smothers and everything like that out. And Howl shows up at the right time and brings Calcifer back to life, and heals him and everything like that, and gets new wood going for him and everything like that. And Howl now looks much more put together. His hair is much more trimmed and everything like that, and he's in like different clothes, so he looks much more clean and everything like that. And he's just like, I would appreciate it if you wouldn't torture my friends and everything like that, is what he's telling Sophie. And like the main floor of the castle is already looking a lot better, in all honesty. And, you know, so they have all that set up. And so then Howl leaves, going back into the black area. And then we get to where Sophie is doing more and more cleaning, and then she's, you know, getting ready to head upstairs to clean. And Markle's like, do my room last, because she's just like, hide anything you don't want thrown away. And heads upstairs. I need to release Grandma Sophie on my sister's house. That would make things so much better there. Watch my brother-in-law try to argue with her. Nope. She's like, I have a friend that's a fire demon. What are you gonna do? Type of a thing. So they, you know, Sophie is like working her way through, and she like looks around in the bathroom, and the bathroom is just so horrible. It looks like there's like dye all over the place and so much other stuff, and it does not look like this bathroom has ever been cleaned, and it looks horrible. And then she ends up like looking out the window to the balcony area, and she's like looking out, and she like sees like that Calcifer is the one that's making the castle move the way that it is. And she runs down, and she's like, I am thoroughly impressed with this. You're a first-rate fire demon. I like your spark. And he's just like, that kind of like encourages him, and she's like, she likes my spark. And he just, you know, that makes him really happy and everything like that. And she's just like looking out there on the balcony and everything like that, and like looking around at the scenery, because of course, while the front door of the castle is connected to like these two different shop fronts, you know, the real door connects out to the waste. And then like the castle itself, you know, is still there regardless of, you know, which door you're going out of. And so, you know, Markle comes out and they're talking, and then Sophie, you know, he's like, are you really witch? And she's like, yeah, I'm the worst type of witch there is. I'm the kind that cleans and everything like that. And what ends up happening is they go down to this lake area, and while Markle and Sophie are outside, they end up seeing this like stick thing stuck in the gear, so they end up pulling the stick thing out. And it's Turniphead, and she's like, huh, I guess he's been following me around and everything like that. So then it's like, while they're down at, you know, Star Lake, at this, you know, beautiful lake area, they end up doing all the laundry. So like, you know, Turniphead and Markle are like, you know, getting all the laundry set up and everything like that, with Sophie directing them and helping and everything like that. And Markle makes the suggestion that like, well, maybe Turniphead is a demon, because Calcifer doesn't seem to mind him and everything like that. And she's like, well, if that's true, then he must be a good demon, since he led me here and everything, like, you know. And they sit and they look at the scenery, and they're just watching, you know, the lake and everything like that. And she's just like, when you get old, all you want to do is sit and watch the scenery and everything like that. So we have that. And, you know, so eventually they head back inside and take in all the laundry and everything like that. And then that, you know, and then meanwhile, while all this is going on, we cut to where Howl is. And Howl is flying through this fiery landscape that has these different large airships dropping bombs and everything like that. And he is in this, like, bird form that he flies around in. And he's like watching as all of this is happening and everything, and he's just like eluding them and evading them and escaping, you know, as these other wizards are coming out that are like, they've turned themselves into monsters for the king, is what it's stated, because like the prince from the neighboring kingdom has disappeared, and therefore Sophie's kingdom is now at war with the other kingdom, because the other kingdom thinks that they kidnapped their prince. I'm like, war is stupid, and I will believe that to the end of my day. So much war is pointless. And all of that. And so, you know, we get to see Howl doing that, and then eventually Howl makes his way back to the castle, goes through the door, and he like is in like this bird form, and it's very painful for him to try to change back. And Calcifer even comments on that, and he's just like, you got to be careful with that. The more you transform like that, the harder it's going to be for you to return to your human self and everything. And Howl's like, I was attacked by my own kind today, other wizards who turn themselves into monsters for the king. And Calcifer's like, yeah, those guys are going to regret it. They're never going to be able to return to being human again. And then like Calcifer shows like what Sophie did, because like Calcifer can like make little like firearms that pop out, and he can like pick up stuff. So we see him like picking up these logs that Sophie put by the fire, so that way Calcifer can like grab the firewood in the middle of the night, or if like other people are too far away to like hand him the fire or hand him the wood or whatever, he can get his own wood. So we see that, and then we see how he like he's like forced himself back into his human form, and he is injured and everything, and he's just like, this war is pointless. And he like looks into where Sophie is sleeping, and when she's asleep, Sophie turns back to her real self, as in she's not like this old woman and everything like that. And so Howl does recognize her, and Howl, I think, knew who she was anyway and everything like that. And we're going to see later on in the movie why there's a reason he found her in the first place. So Howl heads upstairs to bathe and everything like that, and eventually it's Sophie wakes up and she's like, oh, is Howl back? And Calcifer's like, yeah, he's back, and he's using up all my hot water and everything like that. And all of that stuff. So he's just like, he's like grumbling about that and everything. And the next day, Sophie and Markle head off to go to Port Haven, is the other city that because I think it's Jenkins is in Port Haven, and then Pendragon is in Kingsborough in the Royal City. And Markle and Sophie head down to go shop by the harbor and everything like that. So they're like, getting, vegetables and fresh fish and everything like that is what they're trying to get. And while they're down there, there's this battle-ravaged ship that arrives in the port. And, like, so everybody's, like, running over to see what's going on with that. And, like, Sophie and Markle are watching, too. And while they're there, there ends up being Sophie spots some of the blobbermen that work for the Witch of the Waste there. She spots one of them. And then what also happens is that there are some bombs that are dropped into the harbor and everything like that. And then out of them end up falling all of these different propaganda leaflets and everything like that from the neighboring kingdom. So, Sophie and Hal head back, rush back to the shop and head back inside. And while they're there, Howl suddenly comes running down the stairs with just a towel wrapped around his waist, and he's screaming because his blonde hair has turned this vivid red. And he's just like, Sophie, what did you do? You've messed up everything. It's just like you've ruined all of this. And she's just like, he's like, you messed with all of my potions and everything in the bathroom. She's like, no, I just organized them. It's fine. And he's just like, no. And he's just like sitting down on the chair, like pulling his hair, like, no. And crying, throwing a tantrum, as she says later. He's throwing a tantrum. And he's just like, this is horrible. I'm no longer beautiful and everything. And he's just like inconsolable about this. And like his hair then turns from like the red to like purple into like black. And she's like, well, this is a pretty color too, and everything like that. And Howl is just like, I see no point in living if I'm not beautiful. And then he just like, so first of all, the room goes a little wonky, and out like the shadows start going, and Markle says, oh no, he's summoning the spirits of darkness. I've seen him do this once before when a girl dumped him and everything like that. So that's happening. So there's like writhing shadows coming out, and then Howl just gets really slimy. I don't know. I don't get it. He just gets really, really slimy, and like goo is just like coming off of him, and I don't know why, and I don't know what point this is supposed to do. It's like, okay, the summoning the shadow spirits of darkness, okay, I guess that's applicable in this case. Hal puts a lot of opinion into his appearance and everything like that, but it's just like, okay, why are you slimy? Why are you covered in goo? This makes no sense. This does not make sense. I am so glad that, like, when children have a tantrum, they don't end up covered in goo. It's like, ew. Now I have to clean this up, too. And so Hal's throwing this tantrum. And Sophie tries to comfort him and everything. And he's just, like, not doing anything. And she's just, like, she yells at him and she's like, fine. act this way, throw your tantrum. You know, it's like, I've never felt beautiful for once in my life. And she runs outside and runs into the waste area and everything like that, where she's crying in the rain, and like Turnip Head hops over and like has an umbrella that he's like holding over her and tries to cheer her up and everything like that. Eventually Markle runs out and he's like, Sophie, we need you back inside. Calcifer's in trouble. You know, Howl's, you know, just not getting any worse, and, you know, Calcifer's in trouble, until they head back inside. And Sophie, you know, the goo is like creeping up the fireplace, so like Calcifer's trying to move away from the goo. So they get Howl, and they move him over to the stairs. She's like, oh, he's just throwing a tantrum. So they start bringing him upstairs and everything like that. The towel falls at one point while they're going up the stairs. So Sophie's like, I'm not dealing with that. And she gets it, and they get him into the bathroom, and, you know, Markle's in charge of cleaning him up, and Sophie then has to like remop everything that she mopped already because there's goo all over the place. Ugh. And we cut to, I think it's supposed to be like the next day or whatever, and we go into what is Howl's room. And Howl's room has all of these, you know, knickknacks, and clearly a lot of them are like magically based items, but there's also stuffed animals and jewelry and other random things that are just, some are beautiful, some are small trinkets, some are just like so many different things, like just all over the walls. And I kind of equated it to, it's like a dragon with its hoard a little bit. And then like Howl's bed is in the middle of it. And, you know, Sophie is in there, you know, bringing him tea and talking to him. And she's just like, Howl, why is the Witch of the Waste trying to hunt you down? He goes like, she was once quite beautiful, so I decided to pursue her. Then I realized she wasn't. So as usual, I ran away. I can't run much longer, though. I have to report to the palace as both Pendragon and Jenkins. And Sophie's like, how many aliases do you have anyway? And he's like, as many as I need to keep my freedom. And so she's like, well, why do you have to report to the palace? And he's like, well, you see that? And he, you know, points over at the wall where there is this, like, it's supposed to be like the oath that he made in order to study magic at the Royal Magic Academy that requires him to report to the castle whenever he is summoned by the king. And it looks like, it's like the whole thing was like, you put the thing on the dartboard and you throw stuff at it that looks very much like this, where like Howl has thrown like scissors and knives and blades at this like thing pinned into the wall and everything like that out of anger at it. And he's just like, you know, the head sorcerer, the king's head sorceress, Madame Solomon, you know, I'm required to report to the castle and everything like that. So it's just like they're talking about that. And Sophie's like, well, why don't you go to the castle and why don't you talk to the king? Try to, you know, he's supposed to listen to his citizens. Try to explain him that this war is pointless and everything. And Howl's like, yeah, I don't think he's going to listen. And then he, like, looks at her and he, like, jumps, like, you know, kind of jumps out of the bed, or, like, you know, it's like, oh, I know. You can go to the palace in my place. You could pretend to be Pendragon's mother. And she's like, what? And so then I think it's supposed to be like the next day or later that day or whatever, that, Sophie is all dressed and ready to go to the palace pretending to be Pendragon's mother and everything like that, try to convince the king that Howl is a coward and that he's useless and everything. So that's where she's headed, and Howl is like, well, I made you all pretty, but you won't let me fix your hat. And she just like glares at him. And one of the things that you notice as you're watching through the movie is, of course, you know, when she's first turned very old, she's very crunched over and very wrinkly. And at this point in time, she's standing much straighter, and a lot of the wrinkles have left her face. She still has the wrinkles, and of course, with these, when she's in these different forms, as she shifts around, obviously they have two different voice actresses playing her. In the English dub, they have two different voice actresses, and then I'm pretty sure in the Japanese and the original, they probably do as well. And then I was about to say Oda was very specific, but like Oda has no bearing on Miyazaki. Miyazaki's probably inspired a few things from Oda in regards to some stuff, but not so much in regards to One Piece. But I'm pretty sure that like in the process of like developing this based off of like stuff in the book and then stuff that would have been, you know, notes from the author plus notes from Miyazaki himself in regards to like the development of the story, there would have been very distinct points in the movie where it's like, this is old Sophie, or Grandma Sophie as she's referred to as, and then this is young Sophie. And this is where it's the transition from one into the other and stuff like that. So it's just like they would have had that mapped out very, very well to try to make sure that they get everything at the right point for where it would shift from one actress to the next, or where, like, in some cases it's like in the middle of the line there is the shift that happens there from one character to the next, from one voice actress to the next in that regard. So, Sophie starts making, is getting ready to leave, and then he puts this ring on her finger that is like, this ring will always help lead you back, and it'll help me know where you are and everything. And she's like, okay. And he's like, don't worry, I'll be following along behind you. And they, and so she's heading off, and she's making her way through Kingsbury on her way to the castle. And she's like looking around, and she's like, I wonder what Howl would follow me as. And she looks over at like this statue with a bunch of pigeons on it, and she's like, nah, he can't be a pigeon. He's too flamboyant. And then she like sees like this plane fly by in the air that has like this giggling lady on the back of it, and she's like, that could be Howl. I just like, pigeon, nah, not flamboyant enough. Girl flying around in a plane with, flying and giggling and everything like that. That'll work. Type of a thing. And she's just like heading her through it. Eventually she ends up coming across this dog. And she thinks that the dog is Howl, and it gives her like this little weak bark, and so it just starts following her / leading her to the palace. And eventually, as they're walking, they come by there's a carriage that catches up with them, being carried by the two shadow men type thing. And the Witch of the Waste looks out, and she's just like, I see you delivered my message to Howl. Thank you. And how is he? And everything like that. And Sophie's like, well, what are you doing here? And she's just like, I was invited here on invitation from the king and all of this stuff. And she's like, why are you here? And Sophie's like, well, Howl's, been acting like a big baby and everything like that since I started to work for him. So I'm come looking for another job here at the palace and everything like that. And I was like, so it's just like the witch is bragging and all of this stuff. And Sophie's like making up a lie and everything like that. And the witch is just like, yes, I've been waiting 50 years for Solomon, Madam Solomon, who's the king's, top magic advisor and everything like that, the king's witch and everything like that. I've been waiting for 50 years to get this invitation, and I'm not turning it down now and everything like that and all of that stuff. And it's like Solomon is the one that banished the Witch of the Waste to the Waste in the first place and all of that stuff. And Sophie's just like, well, I would like it if you could, reverse this curse that you put on me. And she's just like, oh, my talent is in casting curses, not breaking them. And they both get to the steps of the castle. And when the Witch of the Waste, carriage thing crosses a certain barrier, her two shadow men just get, deflated. So then she has to get out of the thing, and she has to continue up the stairs on her own. And, Sophie and the little dog, who she thinks is Howl, ends up, climbing up the stairs. And Sophie's, having to carry the dog up the stairs. And the witch is, going up the stairs really slowly. So it's just, this old fat woman, or this middle-aged-ish fat woman, in the case of the Witch of the Waste, is climbing up the stairs. And then Sophie is still supposed to be, this older woman trying to climb the stairs and carrying this dog, making their way up the stairs. And the thing is that these stairs are lined by a bunch of guards that could very easily help them and all of that stuff. And so they're making their way up the stairs, and the Witch of the Waste is just looking worse and worse and worse as she's going up the stairs. And just sweating, and just her outfit's just in disarray, and she just looks worse and worse and worse and worse. And, Sophie is, eventually, Sophie's kind of mouthing back and forth to her as they're going up the stairs. And, eventually Sophie is the one that reaches the top of the stairs first. And she, kind of ends up, cheering on the Witch of the Waste a little bit to get all the way up to the top of the stairs. And, they succeed. They both get to the top of the stairs and all of that stuff. And they head inside, and they're being announced as, Mrs. Pendragon and the Witch of the Waste. And the witch is like, Pendragon? Is that your name? Why have I heard that before? So it was like, yeah, it was the name of my tacky little hat shop and everything like that. So they're making their way through, and they end up coming to this room where there's one chair, which the Witch of the Waste instantly runs over and climbs into and everything like that. So she can sit down, and Sophie gets led off by the little dog that leads her into this other little area. And then the Witch of the Waste is kind of like trapped in the room, and on, you know, out of the cubbies on the wall end up appearing these large light bulbs that start going off, and they end up setting up this like light spell thing that, you know, kind of wraps around the Witch of the Waste, and, you know, it's supposed to be, you know, drawing out her power and everything like that. Like Solomon says, it's like returns her to her actual form. And, you know, so Sophie follows the dog, and she ends up being led to this greenhouse where Madame Solomon is waiting in this wheelchair, and where she has like these different blonde boy attendants that I don't know how they fit into the story, but they're cute, and I don't know, and I feel kind of bad for them. And everything like that, because they kind of look like Howl a little bit with the blonde hair and the way that they're all dressed and everything like that for what Howl considers beautiful. So I think it's also revealed, you know, Sophie goes in, and, you know, Solomon introduces herself and everything. She's like that. She's like, ah, so you're Howl's mother. And she's just like, ah, I see my dog was able to lead you here. And Sophie's like, oh, that's your dog. She's like, yes, this is Heen. He's my errand dog. I sent him to escort you here. And Sophie's like, huh. So she just claims that she's Howl's mother, and she explains that he's just a coward and he would be useless to the king and all of that stuff. And Solomon is just, you know, sad and says, well, Howl was the last, you know, was her last and brightest student until his heart was stolen by a demon. And since then, he's been using his magic for purely selfish reasons and everything like that. And, you know, she's like warning Sophie, you know, that if Howl keeps this up, he'll turn into something like the Witch of the Waste. And at that point in time, they wheel in the Witch of the Waste. And she's like very old and decrepit looking and everything like that. And Sophie is like very, very worried by this. They actually wheel her in on a frickin' dolly. It's like, you can't give the woman any form of, you know, consideration, can you? Any form of, you know, just some form of, you know, not being degraded in this regard. And Sophie is just like, oh my god, what did you do to her? And Solomon's just like, oh, I just restored her to her to the age she actually is. All her powers are gone now. Once she, too, was a magnificent sorcerer with so much promise, but then she fell prey to a demon of greed who slowly consumed her body and soul. Our kingdom can no longer afford to turn a blind eye to these disreputable witches and wizards. If Howl reports to me and vows to use his magic to serve the kingdom, I will show him how to break from his demon. If not, I'll strip him of his powers, just like her. Which then, you know, Sophie is now realizing what's going on. She realizes that all of this is just a trap to try, you know, it was a trap to lure the Witch of the Waste there, and it was a trap to lure Howl there and everything like that. And she's just like, and she, like, understands why Howl refuses to come at this point in time. She's just like, you keep manipulating people here. You bring them, you send them an invitation from the king, and then you bring them here, and then you strip them of their magic if they don't agree to serve you. You know, it's like all you know, it's just like, and you know, and she, like, you know, and while this is happening, Sophie is, you know, standing up, and she's having a lot of, she's having confidence, and part of the way that the spell works, the curse works, that's on her, is that the less confidence she has in herself, the older she looks. The more confident she has in herself and the more comfortable she becomes with herself and everything like that, the younger she becomes. And with this moment, she goes from where she's like the old version of Sophie all the way into when she's like back to her normal self, her young self and everything like that. And she's just like, Howl won't ever show up here. He's smarter than that and everything like that. And he's a good person and all of that thing. And Solomon just kind of like smiles as she looks at this, and she's just like, you're in love with Howl, aren't you? Which just shoots Sophie back into like the older version that she'd been. And at this point in time, you know, the witch grabs Sophie. She's like, where's Howl? I want Howl. I want his heart as mine and everything like that. And, you know, Solomon is like, well, now I know Howl's weakness, and that's Sophie. And at this point in time, outside of the greenhouse lands this propeller plane with the king on it, and he comes inside and addresses Solomon and introduces himself to Sophie, and Sophie's like, I'm Howl's mother and everything like that, and he's like, well, I decided not to use magic in this war. It's, it causes too many problems. The spells that are used to protect our palace or, make, the bombs rain down on civilians and everything like that. And, like kind of like chastising, Solomon. And at this point in time, from the opposite end of the room, in comes a second king who is actually shouting about how he's come up with a new battle strategy and everything like that. And he's just like, this is a great copy that you made of me and everything like that, and praises Solomon and then leaves. Which then means that this king, the king that arrived first, is actually the fake king, and that it is actually Howl, and he runs over to Sophie, and he's just like, okay, looks at Solomon and is like turned back into his regular self, and he's just like, okay, Solomon, I reported to the palace as asked and everything like that, so that's what's required of me. And at this point in time, Solomon, activates her power and ends up kind of transforming it into, sending out like this flood of water into the room, transforming it into like them floating over like a field of flowers or a field, and has like the little star things pop up that are supposed to like mess with like Howl, and it's starting to make him like transform into like his part bird form. And Sophie ends up seeing what's going on, and she actually like shoves her hands into Howl's face to like kind of snap him out of this. And then he breaks out of that part of the spell, and then jumps into the air and crashes through the window with the Witch of the Waste and Sophie with him. And then they land on the propeller plane, and the Witch of the Waste is on the back, and then Heen, Solomon's dog, jumps onto the back as well and like flies with them as they're flying off. And so Howl gets Sophie driving, so she's steering the plane thing as they're heading through. And, they're flying off and everything like that. And, he's like, looks over and, like, he sees the Witch of the Waste and the, Heen on the back of the plane. And she's like, and Sophie's like, I guess it's too late to drop him from the plane, which would have been interesting. And everything like that. And she's like, why did you make me do this? Why did you make me come here if you were going to come yourself? And he's just like, knowing you'd be there gave me the courage to show up. That woman terrifies me. I can't face her on my own. You saved me, Sophie. I was in big trouble back there. So she helped snap him out of like the spell that Solomon was trying to put him under in order to try to strip him of his magic or whatever the case may be. To do the same thing that she did to the Witch of the Waste. While this is going on, they're flying. They're also being chased by the king's men, and he's like, okay, that ring I gave you? It acts as a beacon. It'll lead you back to Calcifer and everything like that. You need to summon Calcifer with your heart, and it'll help, lead you back to him. And she's like, okay. And it, like, starts making, like, this little, like, light come off of the ring that she's able to then follow to help her steer. And then he gives them, like, 5 minutes of invisibility and, like, leads away, the other group. So that way, the group of the king's soldiers that are following them. Back at the palace, Solomon is, she's like, has her little cherub boys or whatever they're called, errand boys, around her, and she's like looking at the hat that Sophie had been wearing, and she's like, maybe Hal's mother can help me find him and everything like that. At the same time, both the Pendragon storefront and the Jenkins storefront are being attacked, get busted into by the different, by some soldiers and everything like that. And when they run inside, they find that there's nothing inside. It's just empty and run down and everything like that, because Calcifer has disconnected himself from the other two shop fronts, which I'm pretty sure Hal probably did before he even left the castle, left for the castle in the first place. And so Sophie is then flying, and they fly for a while, and eventually they fly over the town where Sophie is from, and they end up finding, the castle where, the castle where Calcifer is and everything like that. And they're able to get inside. Get inside. They crash into kind of like the face of the castle, and cause some bunch of damage to the castle that way, which is kind of funny. And, they all crash in, and they all end up being fine. And Markle is just so happy to see Sophie, and he's like hugging her, and like she's like, it's okay, Markle, we're fine. And then it's like we cut to later that night when everybody is asleep and everything like that, and Howl makes his way inside from having seen all of the having seen all of the other horrors of war, and he's just like, This war is terrible. They bombed from the southern coast to the northern border. It's all in flames now. And Calcifer's like, I can't stand the fire and gunpowder. Those dopey guys have absolutely no manners. And so it's just like this is kind of the conversation that happens earlier on in the movie, but it's still very applicable here and everything like that. So it's just Howl and Calcifer discussing the horrors of what's going on with that. But when Howl shows up the second time, he's making his way inside, and he's very injured and everything like that, and making his way up the stairs and into his room area. And Sophie wakes up, and she's young, and she makes her way upstairs, and she makes her way into Howl's room, where it now seems to be that he has like clawed out part of the walls and made like a burrow or a den back further into the room. She also sees like bloody footprints on the floor with feathers and everything like that, and she's like looking around. She's like, Howl, is that you? Are you in pain? Tell me what's going on. And he's just like, go away. She's like, no, I'm not going away. I'm going to help you break the spell that you're under. And he's like, you. I can't do the Christian Bale Batman voice. I'm sorry. I don't have the talent to be able to do that on demand. He's like, you can't even break your own spell. She's like, you don't understand. I love you. And he's just like, you're too late. She's like, hell no. And Sophie wakes up from this dream that she's having, and she's back to being the old version again. And everything like that. And so she's back to her old woman form, and she's, it's just like, she turned back into the old woman form at the end of the dream, and then when she wakes up again, she's back into the old woman form anyway. And so they're just like, okay. Eventually it gets to the, Calcifer is like telling Sophie, you need to figure out how to fix this soon because it's getting worse and everything like that, and Howl is getting worse in this regard. And Sophie is just like, if Howl's really a monster, then how, what can Calcifer tell her? And he's like, I can't tell you anything else. I'm sorry. It's, there's only so much I can do. So much I'm allowed to tell you about, like, the contract between him and Howl. And Sophie is just like, Madame Solomon mentioned that he made a deal with a demon. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you, Calcifer? And he's just like, I can't tell you. And so Howl had, so it gets to the next morning, and so Sophie and Markle and Turniphead are all working on getting, like, the propeller plane out of the, Calcifer's face. Out of the castle, and that works and everything like that. And then they're kind of cleaning everything up a little bit, and then that's when Howl comes downstairs, and he's like looking much happier and everything like that. And he's like, okay, and he like looks at Turniphead, and he's just like, you have a bad curse on you. Well, we'll see what we can do. And he like looks at the table, because like everybody's like sitting at the table and eating, and like Sophie's like feeding the Witch of the Waste and everything like that, and the Witch of the Waste keeps like staring at Calcifer. Calcifer's like, could you please not feed her? Can you just like make her go away or something like that? She keeps freaking me out with the staring and everything like that. And Howl is just like makes a comment of like, the Witch of the Waste and Madame Solomon's dog at my table? What is going on here? And Calcifer is just like, don't ask me. Sophie brought them here. She crashed a plane into my face and everything like that. So they have to, now they're going to do some reconstruction on the house, and they're going to move, quote unquote. So Howl and Merkel set up this big kind of like, symbol ritual thing outside, and then Howl makes a smaller one inside of the house, or Howl makes a smaller one inside of the house, and then like he picks up Calcifer in like the shovel out of the fireplace, and then like uses whatever powers in order to adjust the house and everything like that. I don't know if you can hear it. She's snoring in the background. She also looks like she's about to fall off the bed, but she's fine. And what happens is, so Howl uses his power to kind of rearrange everything, and adds on some extra rooms and some other stuff, and like new furniture and all that other stuff, and updates a bunch of stuff inside of the house and everything like that, inside of the castle area. And so they get all that set up, and then Calcifer calms back down. He puts Calcifer back into the hearth, and then Merkel runs off and he starts like looking all over the place. And Sophie is like, she's like, this place looks so familiar, and she's like looking around, and she goes into one of the side rooms, and he's like, well, I made it bigger because our family keeps getting bigger and everything like that. And so she's looking around, and she looks in one of the side rooms that he says is for her, and it is the same room where she had been making hats at the beginning of the movie. It was like her workshop room at the beginning of the movie. But it's different now. It's bare. It just has like the bed, and then it has like some boxes that have some additional clothes in it for her to have, and everything like that. He's like, I got you new clothes and all of that stuff. And he's like looking around, and like Markle runs outside, and there's like the courtyard that's the same courtyard from the hat shop. So it's just like, and he's like, yeah, and there's a shop up there too that we're attached to now, and that's ours too, and everything like that. I have no idea how land transfers and transfers work in this way. I don't think this is quite how they're supposed to work. Where it's just like, oh, now I moved in here with my magic fire demon helped me move into this place, and now it's mine. I'm like, okay. Yeah, I don't know. And what ends up happening is, so it's like they moved into the same building that was the hat shop. So Sophie is very familiar with this building because it's where she grew up and everything like that. So, which I think is definitely something that Howl did intentionally for this, because he knew that it was where she was from and moved in that way. And then he takes her to the doorway where there's a new color that's pink, and he takes her through the doorway, and it is into this beautiful flower covered field and everything like that. And it's just it's just gorgeous to walk around in and everything like that. And there's like this little cottage there near the stream, and Howl explains that this belonged to his uncle, and that his uncle gave it to him, who was a wizard. And Howl just uses a little bit of power to keep the flowers growing and everything like that. And Sophie is just like finding this so beautiful walking around here, and like we see her do the transition from like the older Sophie into the younger Sophie, where she still has like the silver hair, but she is back to like the younger version voice and everything like that, and moving around like she's the younger version and everything like that. And she's having this nice little time with Howl and everything like that. And then he's just like, and you can sell the flowers here too in the shops that we're connected to now, so that way you guys should be able to be okay. And she gets very worried about this, and she's like, Howl, why are you acting like this? You're scaring me. You act like you're going away and everything like that. And she starts becoming old again, and she's like, I know I'm not all that pretty. And he's like, but you're beautiful. And that's when she becomes old again and everything like that, because it's like she can't accept that he finds her beautiful and everything like that. And then suddenly that's when this large warplane shows up into the area. And Howl is very angered by this, and he uses his power to basically kind of go through the ship and cause some malfunctions. He's like, don't worry, it's not going to crash. It will be able to land. It's fine. And they just can't, deliver their bomb payload and everything. And out of the ship ends up coming these different creatures that are like the wizards that have transformed themselves or something else that show up, and they start chasing Howl and Sophie. And Howl has picked up Sophie, turned into kind of his bird form, and ends up flying, and ends up then dropping her through the door into the house, and then door closes, and she lands on the steps, and then Heen and Marco come running back in right on time, and they're just like, oh, this is great. And then Sophie is just like, ow, I'm getting too old for these shenanigans, and she's like back in her old lady form and everything. That night, Sophie and Howl, Howl has not shown back up again, and Markle says, it's okay, sometimes Howl just stays away for several days at a time, and she's like, okay. And, so Markle heads off to bed, and then she's putting the Witch of the Waste to bed and everything like that, and the Witch of the Waste comments that Sophie's in love, and it's like, you've been sighing all day and everything like that. That's what's giving it away, that you're in love. And Sophie's like, yes. And she's like, have you ever been in love? And the witch is like, oh, yes, I've been in love many, many times. I'm still in love with all the handsome young men that I see. And like Sophie is just like, oh, God. It's like the Witch of the Waste is the definition of a cougar by a lot of degrees. and everything like that. She's just like, young men are so troublesome, but I just adore them, and I love her. So she's talking about that. And then Sophie ends up, going to bed and everything like that. And eventually, the next day, you know, there ends up being, or I don't know if it's the next day or like a couple of days later or whatever, but like Markle's getting out to go and make a flower delivery because that's what they're going to do now is deliver flowers via flower shop. And Sophie's mother shows up and she runs in and she runs through the house and she finds Sophie and she's like, oh my God, Sophie, it is you. And she's just like crying and everything. She's like, I've been looking all over for you and I've been so worried and you look so old and I'm just so happy that you're okay. And I do believe that the mother does genuinely love Sophie, that Sophie's mother does genuinely love her. It's just, as we'll find out, the mother is kind of being forced to do some of this, that there's something going on that's being held over her head and forcing her to, that it's Solomon, Madame Solomon is trying to kind of force her to do this. And so she's like looking around and she like leaves her purse, which has a little peeping bug in it, which the Witch of the Waste grabs and gives to Calcifer, which then just makes Calcifer just start blooming out so much like black and yucky smoke and everything, and she starts smoking this cigar that is messing with everything around them, which is not helpful. It's just like, come on, Witch of the Waste, you're supposed to be smarter than this. Also, the Witch of the Waste seems to sift through these bits where she seems much more like an old woman that has some form of dementia, and then into like being the more sassy version of herself. And I'm just like, I don't know where the switch keeps happening, and I don't know if it's supposed to be a reference to like dementia of some kind, but it keeps happening and everything like that. Because there's moments where she is very clear-headed, and there's other moments where she's just like, what's a pretty fire, and all of that stuff. So I just don't know which one is supposed to be affecting her more. And what ends up happening is Sophie is talking to her mother, and her mother explains like, well, I'm getting married again, and he's very wealthy and everything like that, and we can all live together now, and all of that stuff. And Sophie's like, no, I think I'm going to stay here, and stay here with my new family and everything like that. And the mom's happy for her, and then Sophie's happy for her mother, and she heads back. Her mother drives off in the car, and one of the one driving the car is one of the little page boys. That's like, Sophie, how did you not notice that that's one of the little page boys from Madame Solomon and everything like that? And so the mother's like, okay, fine, take me to my husband. So it's just like, I don't know who they agreed to marry her to. I don't know if there's ever a resolution to that in the books or not. But Sophie and Markle are talking, and as they're talking, they see all these people like streaming out of the city because the city is one of the things that can be under attack very soon, so they're all leaving. And Howl is like asking Sophie, are you going to leave too? And she's just like, and he's like, I don't want you to leave. And he's like hugging her and crying, and she's like, no, Markle, I'm not going anywhere. I love you. I'm not going to leave. And so all that stuff. So she's just like, no, we're a family, and I'm going to stay here with my family and everything like that. So they head back inside, and that evening Sophie can't get Calcifer to light up, so that's not working. And he's weak due to the cigar smoke and everything like that, needing the peeping bug. And eventually what ends up happening is Sophie goes outside because they're starting to get bombed and all of that stuff, and Calcifer can't really, he's not in a state to be able to help like protect the house as well as he usually is. So Sophie goes outside, and in the she sees the flames and horror of what's going on, and there's all of these blob men from Solomon that are showing up, and they start attacking her, and she's yelling at them about there's bombs dropping all over the place. Go put out some fires instead of trying to attack us. We didn't do anything. And she's running through the shop trying to escape them, and they're just causing all types of damage. And then of course this is when Howl shows up writing this bomb down, and he prevents the bomb from blowing up and everything like that. And Sophie is just like so happy to see Howl, but he's like in his like this half bird form type thing, and she's so happy to see him and everything like that, and he's happy to see her, and they head back inside, and he kind of starts fixing Calcifer, and he gets the cigar away from the Witch of the Waste and everything like that, and she's like, you're not running away now, and he's like, no, I'm not. And you know, and him and Sophie end up talking, and he's like, you know, I have no intention of running away now. Now I have something I want to protect, and it's like protect Sophie and Markle and his family that he has now made. And he doesn't want to lose that, so he will fight to protect it. He's found his courage. He found his reason to keep going. That's not just being beautiful. What ends up happening is, of course, you know, so Howl says that he's going to stay and protect the hat shop from the outside, and Sophie and the others are going to stay within Calcifer's protection that he can. And, you know, Sophie is very worried about this and everything like that, and eventually she ends up coming up with the idea that she is going to disconnect, that if she can disconnect them from the hat shop, then Howl doesn't have to protect the hat shop, and they only have to then protect the castle because they have a much safer place for them to be. That's much more easily defended than just, you know, being in the stationary location. So she's decided, like, okay, this is what we're going to do. And she tells Calcifer that she's going to, you know, get them out of, you know, that he has to get rid of the portals to the hat shop. And he's like, I can't do that without Howl. She's like, fine. And, like, she, you know, wraps up the Witch of the Waste so they can, you know, head out, and they take her outside. And Sophie scoops Cal out of the fireplace in the shovel. And he's like, crazy lady with a shovel. And he's just like, you can't take me out of the fireplace. No one but Howl can take me out of this hearth. And she, like, scoops him up and starts carrying him out. And he's like, fine, just make sure that I'm the last one that leaves the castle, because I don't know what's going to happen. And they do that, and she, like, carries him out, and, like, everybody else is out, and, like, Turniphead and Howl, or Markle and Heen are all outside along with the Witch of the Waste, and Sophie's the last one out, and then pulls out Cal, and the whole thing just kind of collapses. The whole castle setup just, like, collapses in on itself. And then they start making their way back inside. It doesn't help that it's raining, so everything gets wet really quickly. They make their way back inside, and Sophie is, you know, puts Calcifer down in part of the fireplace area, or an area where he's at least somewhat safe, and starts, you know, bringing him wood and everything like that for him to, you know, start, you know, burning so he can start getting his power back again. Heen even brings over a stick, which is adorable. And, you know, she gets the others all back inside the house and everything like that as they're trying to, you know, get Calcifer's power back up again. And she's like, okay, you need to take us down to the hat shop. Take us back down so that way Howl, we can tell Howl that he doesn't need to keep protecting us anymore. Doesn't have to protect the hat shop anymore and everything like that. And he's like, well, I can't do that on my own. And she's like, okay. And she's like, but I've never seen a fire with more spark. And he's like, it's not about spark. I'm very weak now. And everything like that, with everything that's happened. He's like, I need something from you. And she's like, what do you mean from me? She's like, well, he's like, well, how about your eyes, or, you know, your whatever. And she's like, how about this? And she, you know, offers him her braid, and he's like, that'll work. And he, like, cuts the braid and, like, gobbles it all up, and then he's able to gain so much more power, and he's able to, at least, you know, with his power, he's able to move part of the castle, smaller version of the castle, and starts, you know, she's, like, commanding him, and, you know, comments, you know, about his power and everything like that. And he's like, imagine what I could have done with your eyes or your heart, which makes the Witch of the Waste realize that Calcifer has Howl's heart. And while they're going on, she makes her way over to the hearth, and she just reaches in, grabs Calcifer where the heart is, and pulls him out of the fireplace, which causes the building to start collapsing. And she's holding it, and it starts sparking fire and burning her. Sophie grabs a bucket of water and throws it on them, and that kind of almost puts out Calcifer, and makes just, like, the whole thing collapse and everything. And, like, Sophie and Heen fall off in one area, and then Markle and Turniphead and the Witch of the Waste and Calcifer, as, like, a little blue ball of flame, is, like, being held in, you know, the Witch of the Waste hands, fall off in the other direction. And when Sophie wakes up in the wreck, she ends up, you know, Heen is there, and they end up finding this door that is the door to the shop. And as they go, you know, she's like, I poured water on Calcifer. I could have killed, like, you know, him and Howl might be dead by now, and everything like that. And she just, like, tears streaming down her face and everything like that. And her ring starts glowing again, and it starts trying to lead her to the door. And they make their way through the door, her and Heen do, and it kind of takes them into this black void that then takes them inside of, like, the little cottage that was in the flower field, and they make their way outside of the flower field, into the flower field, and they're going through and they end up seeing that there's these, falling stars raining from the heavens, and they end up, following them, and they see this little boy who is clearly Howl pick up this, fallen star, swallow it, and then out of his chest ends up coming the star again, but now it's this fireball, and it's Calcifer, and it's Howl's heart in it, because he made a contact with the fire demon. And Sophie is watching this, and she's been in her young form for a good chunk of time now. Hasn't reverted back to her old self. She's in her younger form now. And she's, looking over everything, and, she's realizing what's going on, and she's like, okay, I now know how to fight them. I now know how to help them and everything. And, as she's, kind of falling, the ground kind of literally opens up to, like, swallow her, and she's like, Howl, Calcifer, I know how to help you now. It's me, Sophie. Find me in the future, and everything like that. And they fall, her and Heen fall through this, like, portal into the future, I guess. And they're, like, falling, I guess, through time. I don't know. It's not very well explained, but, like, she ends up running on air, and, like, eventually the ring ends up breaking. And she's just, like, crying as they're running. And eventually they end up making their way back out of the door again. And when they make it out of the door, they find Howl waiting there, and he's nearly in this complete form of this, like, monstrous bird and everything like that. And she's just, like, goes over to him. She's like, I'm so sorry it took me so long, apologizing. I'm sorry it took me so long to be able to help you and everything like that. And she gives him a kiss, and she's just like, okay, can you take me to Calcifer and everything? And, like, he, picks her up, and he carries her and Heen to where Calcifer and Markle and Turnip Head and the Witch of the Waste are on, like, this little bit of balanced thing that's, being barely kept together by Turnip Head's power and Calcifer's power. And they get there, and they land, and Howl just kind of, like, all of the feathers and everything like that just kind of blow off of Howl, and he's laying there, and he's, like, almost dead. And Sophie goes over to the witch, and she's like, I need his heart so I can return it to him and release Calcifer. And the witch is like, I don't know what you're talking about. And Sophie, like, hugs her, and it's like Sophie appealing to, like, the witch's better nature, and the witch does give her the heart, and she's like, take care of it. And she's like, I will. And she goes over, and she's, like, talking to Calcifer, who's just, like, this barely little blue thing in her hand, very, very small little flame thing in her hand. And she's like, I don't, if I do this, will it make everything better? If I save Howl, will you die? And she's like, and Calcifer is just like, I don't know, but if you do it, it should be okay. If you do it, we should be okay. And she goes over to Howl, and she, pushes, Calcifer with the heart back into Howl's chest and everything like that. And she made the comment, it's like, it's so warm and fluttery, and Calcifer's like, it's just the heart of a child. That's all it is, because that's how old Howl was when he made the deal with Calcifer. He was a child when he made the deal. So she pushes, the star and Cal back in the heart, back into Howl, and out of it bursts Calcifer. So Calcifer's all better now, and he's back into his, true form. And Howl, wakes up, and he's just like, my chest feels horrible. There's weight on my chest. And she's like, yep, that's the burden of a heavy heart. And she's like so happy and looking at him, and she just, like, hugs him, and he's just like, Sophie, your hair looks like starlight. And he's like, I think it's beautiful and everything like that. And so they kiss. And at this point in time, since Calcifer's power is gone, now whatever is a little bit left of the castle is just falls apart completely. And it starts sliding down the hill. Turnip Head jumps in front of it and, like, uses his stick to, eventually make it slow down and stop and everything like that. And so he's broken. Sophie goes over to him, picks him up, and gives him a kiss, and that then turns him back into his real form. And she's just like, oh my God. And he, bows to her and exclaims, I am actually the prince from the neighboring kingdom, and I'm the one that was missing. I had the spell put on me, but, as a scarecrow and everything like that, to turn into a scarecrow and all of that stuff by a witch and everything. And, now I have to go back to my country and, everything. And the witch makes the comment of, like, I know that spell. It can only be reversed by a kiss from your true love. And I'm like, okay, you just literally set up that Howl and Sophie were supposed to be a true love, and now you have the turnip head turning into a prince and saying that he's supposed to be Sophie's true love. How does this supposed to work? Not that I have a problem with the love triangle, and not that I have a problem with polyamory in that regard, but I'm just like, a little bit different there for a kid's movie. So the witch, is just like, oh, you're so handsome, and like flirting with him, and then he heads off to, he heads off to go back to his kingdom so he can try to get his king to stop the stupid war. And at this point in time, Heen uses his power to like check in with Solomon and is showing him that everything's fine and everything's back to normal and everything like that. And eventually, so she's like, you little traitor and everything like that. So Heen is like gonna stay with Howl and Sophie and everything like that. And Solomon's like, fine, bring me the Minister of Defense and the Minister blah blah blah, and we'll get this all sorted out and we'll get this war, we'll stop this idiotic war. It's like, you couldn't have done that sooner? That would have been helpful. As I've stated before, I am a pacifist and I prefer trying to find a peaceful way of dealing with things, but I am also aware of the fact that there are some times where that's not going to happen, unfortunately. I wish it would. In a lot of cases, I wish the peaceful option was more the preferred option, but I'm not in control. So, yeah. And of course, so they're all happy, and then we cut to where, like, Calcifer shows back up as, like, this, little fireball and everything like that, and he's just like, can I stay with you guys? It also looks like it's going to rain and everything like that. And then we cut to, a little while later, however many months later, and what ends up happening is, of course, Howl and his family have built this new castle that is now a flying castle. And it's beautifully designed and everything like that. They have like a little, little outside area so that way, Heen can run around and all of that stuff. And the Witch of the Waste can just relax and everything like that. And Marco can play and all of that. And then we see Sophie and Howl standing on part of it, and they're just, they're kissing as like they pull away and everything like that. So it's just like they're all just happy at this point in time. We have a nice little way of like ending it out. So we have that. Give me 1 second while I pull up the cast list. Okay, in regards to the cast list, there is, of course, 2 actresses that play Sophie. The young version of Sophie is played by Emily Mortimer, and then the older version is voiced by Gene Simmons. Not the guy from Kiss. She was an actress who actually played the love interest in Spartacus, is one of the things she's known for, and a whole bunch of other stuff. We, of course, have Howl is voiced by, of course, Christian Bale. We have Lauren Bacall as the Witch of the Waste, amazing actress. We have Billy Crystal as Calcifer. Love Billy Crystal. Pretty much anything I've ever seen him in. We have Josh Hutcherson as Markle, so PETA from Hunger Games, if you want a reference from that. He's PETA. This is a couple of years before Hunger Games. We have Blythe Danner as Madame Solomon. I know that I've heard her before in other things, but I just can't figure out where she's, where to place her. There's not too many others. The other one that I did want to point out is Turnip Head / the Prince is voiced by Crispin Freeman, who is, of course, Alucard in Hellsing and Hellsing Ultimate. So I at least wanted to point that out. He does a lot of anime voices, so I at least wanted to point that out. But there's not really too many other ones that are particularly involved here, that are like major ones I wanted to point out. But that's what we have. I love this movie. I love the story of this movie. It is kind of a little bit of a twist on like Beauty and the Beast, but also like, the Belle character, in this case, Sophie, has to find like confidence in herself, and they both have kind of like a curse on them and everything like that. So there's a bunch of stuff there. I love the story. I love the art. I love the characters. Sophie and Howl are one of my favorite Miyazaki couples. This is one of my favorite Miyazaki movies. At some point, once I've watched through all the movies and done all of the reviews and everything like that, I will probably end up doing like a tier ranking list like I did with, the different Disney movies for the different, sections, and then for the Pixar movies and everything like that, I'll probably do one of those with this. One of the other things I kind of want to do with the Studio Ghibli movies is go through and do something of like a timeline to show like in time frame like when each of them is happening. In comparison to each other, for like the ones that take place in like the real world with like some magical elements added into it. So the next Miyazaki movie, or the next Studio Ghibli movie that I will be reviewing, I believe should be From Up on Poppy Hill, I believe is the next one. Which is, again, it's one of my favorites. I just love the story. I don't know why, I just love the story. So that's what I have here for Howl's Moving Castle. I thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye!